welcome all of those who have joined just now to this session today to discuss really how we prioritize justice and fairness in climate actions. This briefing is part of the Chatham House Strengthening Climate Diplomacy series. There's a whole series of briefings in London Climate Action Week. So thank you to Chatham House and all the colleagues who are doing different events. It's going to be on the record, so no Chatham rule here. Everything that you say will be on the record. We have 5 panelists today who will join us. I'm just waiting for the other 2 to join. My name is Farhana Yamin and I'm an Associate Fellow at Chatham House. I've also been involved in the climate negotiations since 1991. And this year is obviously a huge super year in the UN system as a whole, not just on climate, which is the subject of the big UN summit in Glasgow in November, but also has taken up a lot of time in the G7 summit that took place in Cornwall. The UK has a special place and a special role as one of the countries that industrialized first 300 years ago in contributing to climate change, in contributing now to solutions, in acting as a leader. And what I want to use this panel for is really to ask this really amazing set of people the question of how can we have fairness and center justice? How can we marry social justice, climate justice, racial justice, justice for nature at this time when we are also trying to make sure that our economies reconfigure and are able to marry the aspirations of so many people, especially those in developing countries who are now bearing the brunt fully of the economic crisis as well as the nature crisis. The way we're going to do this panel is we have just about 1 hour, and we're going to use that by me posing questions to the 5 panelists who I will introduce shortly. You'll also see their full bios in the chat function, so please have a look at that. You know, it's never a very good use of a very short session to read out the long CVs and very illustrious bios of each one of our 5 panelists. So I please encourage you to have a look, and I think they may also use the chat function to provide additional resources. So keep an eye on the chat function. We'll also ask you to contribute questions via the question and answer box, and I'll use the second half of the hour to pick out some of the questions to pose them to our panelists. And I hope very much that they'll have a conversation between the 5 of them and illuminate really what I think is the next most critical set of questions, and also work out, you know, figure out why we have some very long-standing members of social movements, of academia, of people who've been writing about the environmental governance and climate change for a long time. So why have we not made as much progress? Why have we still got huge disparities? Why are voices still being excluded and not heard sufficiently in the negotiations? So this is as much a chance for the different panelists to talk to each other and to have that conversation. Especially, I'm really pleased to welcome some of the younger activists who are really moving and shaking our world, you know, whether it's in litigation or whether it's in the negotiations or whether it's in the sphere of civil society and organizing. So welcome very much. I'd like to say a very warm welcome to Peter Newell, to David Lammy, to Vandana Shiva, Michaela Loach, and Akufana Muande. I hope I pronounced your name right. I fear I may not have done a great job on that one, but you'll have to tell me. And I hope that you can all introduce yourselves as well in a little bit more detail. But I'll kick off with Peter. So Peter, I've known for about 20 years. He's been, he's a professor at the University of Sussex in international relations and has been writing about different aspects of equity. He's also engaged through the Rapid Transition Alliance in working out how we can get socially just transformational change at scale very rapidly. Peter, yeah, my question to you is really one of Why does equity and justice appear to be such a central issue in dealing with climate change? And how do you think we can better implement climate justice related policies and initiatives at this moment in time?
Great, well, thanks very much, Farhan, and thanks for the invitation to join the panel. I mean, I think really justice and equity issues run through all aspects of the climate crisis, and in a way they always have done. From questions of recognizing the historical responsibility of the global north, questions of carbon debts, and I guess this burning question of social injustice, that those who contributed least to the problem are now most exposed to some of its worst effects. And of course, that's framing some of the ongoing conversations in the run-up to the Glasgow COP around loss and damage, where rightfully many developing countries are wanting compensation and discussion about some of the impacts that they're living with, having not primarily contributed to the problem. But then it also goes through to the question of solutions and whether there's a danger that we further entrench existing inequalities when we acquire land and forest for green grabs to try and meet net zero commitments that many governments and corporations have signed up to, rather than reducing emissions at source. Or when we make bold commitments that as we have done in the UK about trying to reduce our carbon, but then carry on financing fossil fuels overseas in poorer countries of the south. So really these questions of justice run through everything. And I guess we used to think about it primarily in terms of global north and global south. And of course, that makes some sense historically, but I think it's also about race and class and gender because of the vast inequalities that exist within and between countries, both in terms of their contribution to the problem, but also their exposure to harm. So for me, it's more helpful sometimes to think about wealth and inequality when we're thinking about questions of climate justice. Now, of course, we need to break down sort of agency and responsibility further here. And in some recent work, we started talking about the polluter elite and the need to roll back their emissions. And that cuts across north and south. Partly that's around their lifestyles, the frequent flying, owning multiple homes, SUVs, that sort of thing. But it's also their investment power, where they invest their money, which companies, often fossil fuel companies, the stocks and shares they hold, and the political power that they exercise, being overrepresented in committees, the party donations they make, the access to the organs of the state, if you like, is one of the key issues. But also how they became wealthy in the first place. This is one of the key issues. So I think we need a more differentiated conversation about how we get to the roots of this problem and understand it in relation to all these other injustices.
Hey, that's admirably short, and that's about 3 minutes. So well done. Thank you to you. And especially to highlighting this issue, wealth, class, history, the legacies of colonialism, the legacies of the past, really, tough words that are more and more being used by our younger generations. And I wanted to give you an extra minute to see if you can highlight the work from the Rapid Transition report that came out, which really coined this polluting elites phase, and just give the audience a little bit of a snapshot of just how big those disparities are in wealth terms at the level.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so one of the issues we're trying to draw out there, often in this debate about how to move forward, there's a big push towards individualization of responsibility. And so we were trying to challenge that slightly. Or this divide between individual change and system change. And we were trying to show that the two are intimately connected. So it is about shifting behaviors of particularly high polluting groups, and there are particular behavior hotspots we referred to. But for the bulk of the population, most people are just trying to get by in their day-to-day lives, right? They just need to get to work. They want to try and afford to be able to heat their homes. And it's about shifting infrastructures, it's enabling decent housing, low carbon forms of transportation that are affordable. It's about those sorts of bigger shifts. So rather than saying, it's about nudging everyone to do the right thing, let's be a bit clearer about where primary responsibility lies. And that's one set of strategies around restrictions on SUVs, car-free cities, frequent flyer taxes. And there's another thing which is about just enabling people to go about their lives in a lower carbon way, recognizing that they often don't have that much control or agency over those sorts of things. So that's where we drew on Dario Kenna's idea about the polluter elite and the different dimensions of power they have. And I guess ultimately, that'll be my final comment. It really is about a power shift between states and citizens, capital and labour, north and south. Those are the sort of things we really need to push back on if we're going to get any sort of form of climate justice, in my view.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thanks. Well, I'm going to give your last remaining 20 seconds to Vandana Shiva, who, frankly, absolutely needs no introduction, is a complete hero in the world of activism, and is someone who has led, created, shaped our thinking on fighting on so many fronts, illuminating, the sides of globalization that we didn't want to see, and which were very much, part of the gains that were made in stopping the worst excesses of globalization, whether it was on the WTO, the TRIPS agreement, intellectual property rights, farmers' rights, labor and so forth, and fighting against biotech to pharma to this entire corporate-led way of thinking about land use and the way that we have our relationship with nature. So Vandana, I'm going to ask you, with that wealth of experience of social movements, what strategies and approaches do you think have worked best to create better, more just outcomes? And what advice can you give to those of us who are still fighting and engaged in climate policy about what we can learn from those struggles, especially, how and why we need movements led by those affected by injustices first and foremost?
Thank you so much, Farhana. I never give advice. It's too arrogant. In a world of so much richness of diversity, the best you can do is share your experience. And I want to just briefly touch on the fact that in my long life, I've had many, many, many experiences. The first experience is as a scientist who chose to do quantum theory, to say science is not a comprehensive description. There's quantum science and there's mechanical science that came out of the fossil thinking. Mechanical science is wrong on every count because it assumes the fossil civilization. Every category of it, including the second law of thermodynamics, is based on entropy. But all of life is based on negative entropy. My guru, Schrödinger, what is life? Negative entropy. It organizes life rather than disorganizes life. So the first is, I think we need to stop talking of science in absolute terms and describe more with science. Is it exploitative science? Is it extractive science? Is it mechanistic science? Is it ecological science? So who are the people who are suffering most today? Those who have the science of knowing how to live at peace with the earth, because for thousands of years, they did not contribute to climate change. So if there's one reason we must listen to them, it is because they did not contribute. And we shouldn't only look at them as victims, but we should look at them as experts for another way of living. And that includes indigenous people, it includes small farmers, it includes women, it definitely includes the youth. The second very big issue, I think we need to really get out of the trap, because the fossil fuel age, which you described so well, was basically putting the empire on fast forward. It was a colonial enterprise. And the colonial enterprise went hand in hand with dividing the world on race, on gender, on everything, but also separating humans from nature and defining nature as dead. All the brilliance of the Bacons was all about nature is dead, but nature is alive. And we will not get climate problem defining and climate solution till we start to realize that the biggest actor is Gaia herself. She's the actor. And in fact, climate change is a violation of the planetary boundaries and therefore the violation of Gaia's rights. We will have, that's how indigenous people define it. When I go to the mountain villages in the, where glaciers are melting, causing disasters like the February disaster in my region, that's how they talk. They talk about the violation of the Earth's rights. Go to Bay of Bengal, look at the cyclones, Amphan last year, Yas this year. They talk about the violation of the Earth's rights. All our cultures look at nature as a living entity. And we have to correct that harm of the fossil age that nature is dead. The second is, and I think it was so well laid out before me, that the elite polluters are the colonizers, and they're trying to find new ways to colonize. And among the things that is happening is, have been in the climate negotiations. I was in Rio. We were talking about the polluters should pay. We were talking about not making the poor pay. And I remember there was Lawrence Summer came out with a whole thing of, oh, the poor don't count. And I remember working with my minister to write a speech that we in the third world are 1/15 of the value of people in rich countries. This is an arithmetic of genocide. We thought we had finished that false argument of injustice and apartheid. It's bouncing right back with human capital, nature capital, and the new calculus. Net zero was mentioned. It's fake science and fake accounting joined together. And just because the polluters have the power, they're hijacking. I felt so bad that at the G7 summit, they actually repeated this nonsense. There's nothing like net zero. There's absolute zero reduction of polluters. That's how polluters will pay. And the final issue in all of this is to recognize that 50% of the greenhouse gases come from industrial agriculture. Also the reason for invading into forests, also the reason for new infectious diseases and locking us all down in COVID. So these problems are interconnected. The epidemic, the health problem, the climate problem, the species extinctions are all linked, and they're linked to the injustice problem. Injustice to Gaia, injustice to those who never caused the harm. And that's why we do need a redefining of the problem and looking at deep solutions. The work I do is how we can address climate change by protecting the small farmer, by bringing carbon dioxide back into the land through the plants, bringing the nitrogen dioxide back into the plant. The science is all there. The problem is when nature works, the billionaires don't make money. When billionaires make money, nature must get disrupted faster, the poor people must be displaced, and net zero is nothing but we'll keep most of the planet to keep polluting in the old way, and the second half will be our conditionalities to prevent you from doing your agriculture, your forestry work, your fishing work in your way. So it is also an issue of democracy, not just an issue of justice, also an issue of democracy. That's why I always say it is about Earth's democracy, the rights of the Earth and the rights of the last human being on the Earth. And, I think the tricks the billionaires are playing are the ultimate challenge on how we will defend the rights of the people and the rights of the Earth.
Vandana, I'm nodding in huge agreement, and I can see other fellow panelists nodding too. And I read an Oxfam report recently that reported, I think it was 2,143 billionaires now in the world have wealth, which is about 43%, more than 43% of the population, just those 2,143 people. And that is the scale of the disparity, when you boil it down and see who's now holding the wealth. It isn't even in companies, it's in the hands of these individuals who also then control a lot of the press and our democracy. And thank you for making those links with our political system. We're going to come back, Vandana, to you.
And Farhana, just one little quickie. There's another Oxfam report that shows the 1% is responsible for 99% of the pollution. So it's not just about the wealth inequality, it is about the pollution inequality. And the tragedy of this appetite is the polluters want to rule the world when they should be getting controlled and be made to pay in many, many ways that were laid out.
Well, let me turn now to thank you to David Lammy, who's joined us. David as well needs no introduction to at least the British audience. Let me just say a warm welcome to David Lammy, MP for Tottenham, not far away from where I live. And to those who are maybe watching outside the UK, he's the MP for Tottenham. He's the Shadow Secretary of State for Justice. He's a former barrister, and he's been one of the loudest and I would say the most effective voices in raising social justice, in raising racial justice issues, whether it's in the criminal system, whether it's Windrush, whether it's Glenfell, whether it's the admissions to Oxbridge, whether it's diversity in the BBC. So he's engaged on so many fronts, and I'm so grateful for all that you do. So David, over to you in asking you to contribute your, sadly, 5 minutes only, but I know that you're a wonderful speaker. So
I'll do my best.
Yeah, so I'll stop rambling, and you know what you're being asked. You're asked, how do you think the fight for justice can be better intertwined with social and racial justice issues? And, you know, maybe something about the UK and your expectations and hopes for the UK's leadership in the G7 and the COP.
I think the starting point is to say very, very squarely that there is no climate justice without racial justice. The two are inseparable. And if you care about racial justice, then you've got to care about climate justice. And if you care about climate justice, you've got to walk hand in hand with those who understand the issues of racial justice. So what's historically happened is I think that a lot of black and brown people, certainly in Western economies, whether it's the UK or Europe or America, have seen the environmental movement, if you like, as elitist. And those fighting the climate fight often have ignored the voices of those who are marginalized, or indeed who are victims of the equation as we find it. And it's to say this is not sufficiently understood or put squarely on the table, that the stark reality is that both are rooted in a colonial history. Climate change is colonialism's natural conclusion. The business of extraction that built the country like the UK into the 6th richest economy in the world, whether that is the extraction dent by my enslaved ancestors in the Caribbean and the Americas, or it is the extraction of working people down mines in Europe or in countries like South Africa. That has got us to this point. And that's why the link between climate and colonization is so essential to understand. And the fight that is taking place now as a result of George Floyd's murder, Black Lives Matter, these two things are intimately entwined. The pandemic that we are in, who is affected by it, who is dying across the world, the nationalism that we're seeing on the vaccine, and the only other major national issue breaking out of the United States at this time, the murder of George Floyd. These things are inextricably linked. So the legacy of exploitation, extraction, and segregation that looms large today, whether it's in London, Detroit, Flint, or Chennai in India, black and brown people, the bottom line is, have contributed the least to the climate breakdown, and they will suffer the most as a result of it. And what are the steps and the policies that are necessary? Well, it starts, of course, with understanding that there is no one policy or action which can achieve the reconciliation that's required, but it does start with recognition. Equity and racial justice are still not seen as part of the conversation on climate and environmental action here in the UK. A poll of Brits found that just 26% of them believed that Black, Asian, Arab people are the hardest hit in the world. That shows the lack of understanding of the subject. So recognition, I think, is important. And then you've got to be having the frank conversations that are necessary. And that is really a conversation about disproportionality. We've got a generation of young people who are not willing to accept discrimination, whether it's based on gender, income, religion, or race. That is very, very hopeful. If you look at who's protesting, who's marching, that fills me with tremendous hope. And we've got to harness that as we move forward. There is a challenge to the sector. Why are all the leading jobs in the sector, the CEOs of so many of our climate NGOs, why are they occupied by white people on the whole world? What are the boards? What's the composition of the board? What is our understanding of the position of the Global South? Why do we demarcate international development in one place and climate emergency in another place? So there's a question of equity, and there's a question of equity within and outside countries. I would love to have a climate organisation based in a constituency like Tottenham, or Brixton, or Moss Side in Manchester, or Chapeltown in Leeds. Is yet to happen. We never see those climate activists. We never see those CEOs in communities like the ones that I represent. So there's a lot to do, I think, in the sense that the way in which the sector is structured and the way in which it has to challenge itself to answer these questions about why it's just white middle-class people occupying a place at the table. And clearly, in order to lead, the UK has got to set an example within the G7, cutting our own aid budget at a time when Britain seems reluctant to even examine its colonial past. And we've got leaders organising the booing of people taking the knee is an indication of the journey yet to travel here in the UK. And clearly, as has been indicated with the last speaker, there are real issues of promises that are made to developing countries in the Global South, and then the finance doesn't follow. The developed nations were promised 100 billion by 2020 to finance a lot of what is needed. And of course, we haven't seen that. Rich countries have been able to mobilize 15 trillion in response to COVID-19. Sorry, that's the bells of the House of Commons going. So it's probably a good place to stop.
It is actually a great place, because you've highlighted, some of the expectations and some of the disappointments that the countries that I've been helping to advise for the last 30 years are feeling. Is it too late for 1.5? Is a question I hear repeatedly. I would say mainly by white people. Nobody asks this question because it's a question. It's a survival tactic. You don't just suddenly say, "Oh yeah, I'll give up on my human rights," because you know what? It doesn't make sense for anyone else. So no one ever even frames it in this way ever. And you're quite right to maybe point out, and maybe Vandana, linking to your insights. I see Glasgow very much as the end of a 400-year cycle, hopefully the end of a 400-year cycle of extractive knowledge of this separation from nature, of a journey of a settler mentality that took us on a journey of ecocidal proportions. So let me turn and give our final two panelists also their due and just share of time. I want to thank you, David. I hope you will remain, whatever the bell is saying that you need to go and vote for, I hope you'll be able to stay for the second half. I'd like to welcome Akufuna Moyonda, who is the organizer and I think co-facilitator or coordinator of Resilience 40, which is a network of organizations and groups working across Africa. And Africa is the continent, as a continent, that has really contributed the least and is going to bear, and is already bearing, some of the most horrific consequences in terms of drought, in terms of desertification, in terms of also land grabs and the worst successes of globalizations in some ways. So Afukuna, I'd really like you to share with us, how you're reaching the communities that you work with, how you're helping those who are not represented or underrepresented have their share of voice and have their share of framing and devising solutions. Thank you very much. I hope you have 5 minutes as per the other guests.
Yeah. So I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to be part of this incredible undertaking. This is what we need for us to, to actualize our intention to bring about the subject of equity and justice in the climate change fight. I feel represented. I feel Africa is represented in the conversation. I feel young people from Africa are represented. I feel members of the communities who I work with also are represented. So why is this important for Africa? It's very important because actually, if we are talking about climate justice, let's start from the issue David mentioned earlier on. Africa contributes very little in terms of global emission, about less than 4%. But at the end of the day, we are the mostly vulnerable continent to the adverse impact of climate change. What does that mean? It means that we don't have the resources, we don't have the capabilities to actually survive the extreme, negative impacts of climate change themselves. When we are hit so badly, and we are talking about a continent which is already poor, full of poor people, no jobs. Agriculture is the crisis, even when we depend on agriculture mostly for all our productivity. And we know that climate change has got a direct impact on agriculture. So the problem is actually very serious when it comes to Africa. And it's very serious because whenever I go to the grassroots to do my work of raising awareness, the reality on the ground is there is a high illiteracy levels on the part of the citizenry. And this is actually where the problem comes from, because people are not able to interpret the problem, are not able to connect the problem that they're facing to the subject of climate change. Then what kind of leaders then do we have? What kind of leaders do we produce at the end of the day? So we produce leaders that come from a background of no understanding about what this climate change issue is all about. Sorry about that. Yeah, it's like my next office, someone is banging the very disturbing, but sorry about that. Yeah, so I was talking about leadership. I was talking about producing leaders that cannot make right decision for the people to address the real problem that they are facing. So in my own experience, what I've come to learn as a critical aspect of what we're talking about is making data available. There is no information on the ground. Even right now, if I'm asking you to explain to me what are the issues that Zambians are facing in regards to climate change, it's very difficult to find actual data. It's very difficult to find real data that can help you make right decisions, to inform policies, to inform, we're talking about the COP26. And COP26 is not a small issue, it's a big event, and we're talking about real issues affecting the real people on the ground. For me, climate justice is not just about the people. Actually, climate justice starts with the environment itself, the animals, then the people last, because we are the ones who depend on the environment, we are the ones who depend on the animals. And if whatever decisions are made are not helping us to conserve our environment, to protect our animals, then we are killing ourselves. Just a few days after the World Environment Day commemoration here in Zambia, the Zambia Environmental Management Agency, gave a license to a developer to build a mine in the Lower Zambezi National Park. What kind of a decision is that? Such are examples of high injustice, not only on the people, but also on the environment itself, because the ecosystem is connected and you cannot isolate issues out of that. So before I was cut earlier on, I wanted to give an example of what I did in 2012 when I did my first workshop on deforestation and climate change. So we have a district called Chongwe, which is a highly deforested district in Zambia. So I targeted that district because I wanted them to start understanding what they are doing and what dangers come about by cutting down trees unnecessarily for whatever reason they have. So at that point, I was so angry. I thought, yeah, they are on the wrong side of the story. So when I went there, I was really, adamant. I was like, guys, this is not right. Stop cutting down trees. We are finishing our forest and so on and so forth. But they asked me one question which changed my approach to the whole issue. They asked me to say, yes, we understand what I've told us and we appreciate that you found time to come here and actually educate us. But now what next? Because us, we need to eat, we need to take our children to school. And the only way we can do that is to cut down these trees, make charcoal, sell. The demand is high and we make our money and that's how we survive. So then what can we do? That was a very difficult question for me to answer. And this is why, as part of the lesson that I can share in this meeting is, as we go to these communities, underserved communities, we shouldn't just go with the message. Let's go with the solutions as well in the message. What is the solution? Yes, we want people to stop cutting down trees, but what is the alternative? Yes, we want people to stop using fossil fuels, but what is the alternative? And is it available? Is it accessible? And in my work with the company called Battle Light as a social enterprise, we are trying to distribute renewable energy solutions to underserved communities. As you know, Zambia has over 90% of the rural communities that are not connected to the grid electricity. So access is a problem. Access in two ways. One, affordability. Is the solution affordable? Yes, we talk about modern energy solutions, but is it affordable? to the community, the larger poor community out there. Is it also accessible? When I want to buy a solar home system, where can I find it? It's difficult to find it here in Africa. It's difficult to find it here in Zambia and the rural areas in Zambia. And this is what we are talking about when we say climate justice. So decisions must be made correctly. Policies must be made to encourage an environment that allows for increased investment in the solution that we have, but also create opportunities to engage the grassroots in the decision-making process. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Akafuna, for sharing with us a little bit of your own journey, your own challenges, and also absolutely, how we have to give voice to all of those. No one is voiceless. People are excluded, marginalized, not listened to in structures of power. So thank you so much for that. And sorry that you had to bear with the banging, but we could hear most of what you said. So let me turn now to our final panelist member, Michaela Lodge, who is an activist, now a fifth-year medical student, is the convener of a podcast called Yikes, which I encourage you all to listen to. Michaela, you're on your way, I think, somewhere, but please share with us, where you think we can best have an impact at this point in time, especially what can we do to tilt the scales against the powerful in our fight for climate justice? How can we have a more inclusive movement which shares and gives leadership and voice, as I said, to those who have not been prioritized or those who've been marginalized? And I know that Michaela, you may not know, is also one of the 3 plaintiffs who's taking the UK government to court for continuing to pollute and to grant new licenses in the North Sea. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your work and your insights, and then we'll have some questions which I can see are coming in. So please try and keep them short so that I can read through them. And my colleague Anam Farhan, who's organized this, she and I can select which ones to put to the panelists in the last few minutes. Thank you. Over to you, Michaela.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's been wonderful to hear what everyone else had to say, so I feel really grateful to be included in this conversation. I think just maybe to explain a bit about the court case, because that's something that I hope people could support. So I'm one of 3 claimants on a case which is basically taking the UK government to court over their policy in the North Sea, in which they're actually giving huge amounts of subsidies and tax breaks to multi-billion-pound companies that are exploiting the land and are extracting so much oil and gas. And this means that they're being promoted in extracting oil and gas, which is something that is in direct contradiction to any kind of climate goals that we're wanting. And kind of so that you can support that case at paytopollute.org.uk, and we'll find out soon about when this judicial review will be happening. But also kind of attached to that, and this I think connects to like what I think we could focus on, is obviously a lot of my work surrounds oil and gas and fossil fuels, and realizing that we cannot be continuing to extract oil and gas if we want to stay within planetary boundaries, but also that I see the extraction of oil and gas and the promotion of this as a justice issue in so many ways. Because if we think about how in the UK, especially in the North Sea, the oil that's being extracted and the gas that's being extracted and burnt, that has huge impacts in other areas of the world, more so than in the UK. And all of these companies and our governments are aware that the impacts of the climate crisis are being felt most and hardest by communities of colour and by previously colonised countries, especially. I was born in Jamaica, I'm half Jamaican, and I realised that going back to Jamaica whenever I'm there, I can see the impact of the climate crisis happening now. And that is directly connected to the exploitation and the extraction of oil and gas that happens in the North Sea, as well as other places. But I feel like we don't talk about North Sea oil and gas at all, if not much at all. Also, the UK government are currently set to approve a new oil field called the Cambo oil field, which is kind of ridiculous that they're approving new oil and gas fields. But that would set to extract 150 million barrels of oil within the first kind of period. And I want everyone who's watching this to get involved in opposing that, because we still have time to stop that from happening. The impacts of that would have huge implications all over the world, and we need to stop new oil and gas. Sorry that I'm using this as like a plug about how we can stop the fossil fuel industry. But this is something that I think that we don't connect to justice issues enough. I think sometimes climate, I think the idea that climate change isn't a justice issue or is just this science issue or is separate from justice only allows these big polluters to carry on polluting, only allows governments to make policies that have loopholes in for polluters to continue. Because we have to think about who this kind of narrative benefits, because all of us as panelists here need to remember that we are part of the global majority. We are not the minority in the world. People of color, communities of color, we are the majority in the world. There are more of us than there are of any of the others. And also communities that are marginalized. It's forced marginalization. It's not like an inherent value that people hold. And I think so often when we talk about climate as just a science issue and we don't include the justice things, that does help these polluters, because then the global majority don't realize how it impacts us, and we don't organize and mobilize in the same way because we see climate as this like issue with hippie white people and not with our communities. And that's why I think including justice in the conversation and including in the conversation how it impacts how it's impacting or it's connected to white supremacy and colonialism, that benefits all of us and also allows more people to be involved, because we can see how it connects to our communities and our communities will be involved. And so I think through kind of the work that I do, a lot of it is around communication and making those connections and those links. And I found that so often when you talk about climate as a justice issue, more people from communities that are currently underrepresented in the climate movement feel like they can be involved because they realize that this is an issue that impacts them, that everything is a climate issue, that all justice issues are climate issues too, and that we all need to be involved with them. So I think that a big way that we can get more people involved, because I think that was kind of what your question was, and how can we make it more equitable in that way, is just to talk about like food justice as a climate issue, about kind of racial justice as a climate issue, talking about these issues that already exist, that communities already care about, and showing how that already connects to climate. And then that will allow for, I think, more people to participate and more people to want to be involved. Oh, sorry, I just realized that my laptop just opened a whole screen. Okay, everyone's back. This is the issue of Zoom things. But yeah, I think that we need to just connect everything always back to the fact that it is a justice issue and that it's a climate issue, make sure that we're not toning ourselves down and we're not also restricting the kind of view that we could have for a new world. I'm very much someone who believes that we have to have the audacity to believe that the world can be better. And I think that kind of connects a lot to what I can't remember who it was actually who was saying, that they find that it's only white people who seem to ask if we can stay within 1.5. I personally can't even allow myself to think that we can't. Like, I think I have to have that audacity to believe that we will achieve this better world. Otherwise, I don't know how I'd be able to kind of get on with my day to day. And I think the more of us that can have an audacity to believe that the world could be so much better than it is now, and that we don't have to stay within the confines and the restrictions that are put upon us by capitalism and white supremacy and all these restrictive forces, that's when we can achieve a better world. And I think that comes from all of us organizing, that comes from individuals all coming together in your community, whoever you are, whatever your skills are, getting involved in organizing, being part of the sleeping giant that awakes and that creates a new world. And so that was a bit of mumbly jumbly bumble, but that's what I would say.
Michaela, it was so eloquent, and you have packed in so much into your 6 minutes. I'm just so impressed. I met Michaela as part of a BBC thing honouring women who were playing a leadership role, and I was just astounded. Follow her on Insta. This is what our new young people are using, all sorts of tools, and she manages to say, you know, stuff in 2 paragraphs that used to take me like a whole chapter to talk about. Thank you to also David and to all of the panelists. You know, certainly speaking from my experience as someone who has lives in and is based in the UK, you know, the environment climate movement has in the UK been the whitest movement next to farming, basically. So yes, absolutely, this needs challenging, and I'm so glad that there are many young people emerging, and my new job is to try and work and find funding for all of these, because foundations replicate and see leadership from the existing players, and absolutely we need hubs on every high street, which is what I'm trying to also work on. So we bring climate action, social action to our community centres and ask them and ask our high streets and people in every community to step up. So absolutely wonderful linking of the things that are the big themes. And Michaela wants to say something.
One thing I wanted to say actually on the kind of the fact that the climate movement is so white, I think we also need to remember that the climate movement might look white in the media, but the media make choices about who they decide to represent and who they decide to not represent. All of these things that we have in the world, we need to remember that those are all choices that have been made. The fact that the climate crisis has been allowed to get this far was a choice that was made because they realized the impacts are not being felt by the white communities the most and aren't being felt by the kind of more wealthy communities the most. The fact that the climate movement looks very white is a choice made by a lot of media people to choose, as wonderful as Greta Thunberg is, but to choose a white, like a woman from Sweden, rather than an Indigenous activist that's been chaining themselves to pipelines for years. They choose what type of things they want to show and what to want to popularize. You need to remember that the media is not always a representation of the whole movement. Actually, when we look at also communities of color in general actually statistically care about climate more and actually want to act more, but they just aren't represented. But I just wanted to just challenge that because I feel like it's always a difficult one.
No, absolutely. And I want to segue to the question part, but to say, also, this is my Paris Agreement, which isn't showing up because I've got a screen. So the most important parts of the Paris Agreement: 1.5, net zero by 2050, the loss and damage, climate justice, and the respect for human rights, adaptation, finance, and reform of finance. These are all issues that were put into that treaty from least vulnerable and developing countries, from Black and brown people and civil society. They were not put in from the major powers. They resisted them right till the very end. It took a huge amount of diplomacy to do that, including things like the concept of net zero, which is now being greenwashed and abused, but was put in there to operationalize this 1.5 degree limit. I've got a couple of questions coming from the floor, and I feel we should honor and respect the audience who's asked those. So one is, do we have a way in which we can bring climate justice more centrally as a key issue to COP26 itself? There are references, as I said, in the Paris Agreement itself to climate justice, to just transition, which have not been operationalized. That's one of the things I'm exploring and would love your views on. We also have questions which were asked about, are there any historical analogues where a large set of people, especially Black and brown people, as we mentioned, who are disproportionately impacted globally by these impacts, where they have received recognition, compensation, where those injustices have been answered? We've just seen the ecocide panel, which put forward a new definition of ecocide that could be added to the Rome statute of the International Criminal Court. But I wonder if you might address some or all of those questions in maybe very pithy 1 to 2 minute interventions, and just wave. I think I saw Vandana waving first, so I will ask her to start, please, and put on your mic. You're on mute.
Yeah. So 2 quick things. One, to support Michaela. People forget that the climate treaty and the biodiversity treaty was led by the governments of the South and movements. Yeah. It was always the rich countries were trying to block these treaties. So these issues are really issues of the majority of the world and issues of the rights of the earth. We forget that too. The second big issue really related to the questions that are being asked now is, when you think of it as colonialism is inevitable, the fossil thinking, I talk about fossil thinking as mechanistic thinking. And because I've done physics and quantum theory, I know this is a very narrow way of thinking. There's so many other sciences, and we always are reduced to a fossil science. The minute we widen our scope, we get amazing regeneration options. For those who want to know, is there a prior experience? We threw the British out. Freedom movements and independent movements are the prior experience. It's just that now the freedom and sovereignty has to be individuals, communities, local level. I don't think the countries themselves, because they too are locked in to this billionaire rule and the polluter rule. So from the ground up, of course, we can do what our freedom movements did and our freedom fighters did.
Thank you, Vandana. David, maybe next?
Well, look, there's a number of things. We've obviously focused quite a lot on the problems and on the framing, because the framing is so problematic for our lives. So we're right to do that. But we should just focus on some of the solutions on the table. I do think the ecocide development is really, really important. It's important to understand that 80% of the world's biodiversity is effectively on indigenous land. and that we've got to empower and support the world's indigenous people. What Bolsonaro is doing in Brazil is a disgrace. I have an initiative in Guyana, the country of my parents' birth, called Sophia Point, which is about, it's an educational really in conservation and research, and it is absolutely about standing alongside indigenous communities. I think that we've got to, Europe needs to look more squarely at what's been done by Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. I think the Justice 40 initiative is important. I think that seeing Black and brown colleagues like OCA pressing hard to ensure that equity falls to Black and brown people is central. We haven't seen those developments in Europe, and we need to see them. And because we also need to bring on new generations of young people in constituencies like mine in the global north, where are the bursaries? Where are the scholarships in environmental science? How are we equipping communities to be around the table and to have those conversations? How are they acquiring the skills and the discipline? Why are they still being shut out of those places? This is why I've raised issues about equity at Oxford and Cambridge, but they're all linked. So I've been moved by Michaela and Vandana and what they have said, but it is to say that there's action that can now be done. There's some progress in the United States. Also, of course, the Environmental Justice Advisory Council's 50 million, again, building in equity and Black and brown faces. I think that is progress, and we need much, much more of that.
Thank you. And maybe I can ask Akafuna to respond, and I hope the banging stays away.
Yeah, it's like David Lamy was speaking my mind. Yeah, we really actually need to start talking more of the solutions, and that is what actually will inspire, progress overall. And I agree with him, especially when it comes to education aspect of it. If you come back here to Africa, it's very difficult, especially in Zambia, to find, scholarships, to find opportunities for young people to learn and improve their understanding. There's very little, finance that is channeled to research and development around the subject. So how can we be very instrumental in contributing to finding solutions when you have little understanding, when you have little knowledge, little opportunities to build the capacity? So I think capacity building should be a priority, even as much as we talk about all movements. For any movement to be successful, to be progressive, people must have the capacity to contribute effectively. We must be able to give them the knowledge and skills to understand and interpret their surrounding. Nature-based solutions, for example, is one of the things that is not highly talked about, that is not given attention that it deserves. And this is actually the way I think we have a serious hope in terms of addressing the problems of climate change itself. So we need to start writing about the solutions we have from nature itself. We need to start educating our people. We need to have actually, even at the COP26, a conversation around nature-based solutions. What are the needs in terms of resources to finance research around that? How can other countries learn from that? What can be done in order to document this information? So because right now, Vandana has some knowledge that I don't have, and this is another generation. So we need to have an intergenerational conversation around all these issues. That knowledge that she has should be documented somewhere so that even my children, when they come, they should be able to find that information. And that's what will help us to define the problem, but also to define the solutions to everyone else. Because if you're talking about justice, then we shouldn't talk about global south, global north. We should just talk about humanity. We shouldn't talk about race. We should talk about humanity overall. And this is actually the best approach that we can use, first of all, to put education first, empower the people, then we can be able to contribute effectively to find the solutions, but also be part of the solutions ourselves. However, we need to also understand, one thing that I wanted to share with earlier on was the climate politics itself is a very critical subject that we shouldn't ignore. As an environmental activist in Zambia, I've been doing this out of passion and nothing else but just passion. But I've come to learn that I need more than passion, but also the ability to handle this from the political perspective so that we can challenge the political myths around the climate subject, because politics has got huge influence.
Thank you so much. I just want to, I know we're coming up to 12 o'clock and we had 1 hour. I hope if the panelists can stay on and if the audience wants to stay on for a few minutes, that we might give the end words to Peter and to Michaela. I hope that's okay. We'll just carry on, okay, and see if the IT people allow us to carry on doing that. So thank you so much, Akafuna. Michaela, maybe you, and then I can give the last word to Peter, as he was very succinct and has not had a chance to come back and has been very polite in giving space to all of us. Michaela, over to you.
I'll try and also be succinct, sorry for jumbling on before. I think I kind of wanted to add on to what people were saying about talking about solutions, because I think that can be something that is also really motivating, and so often I think we can get constrained by the world as it is now and not allow ourselves to imagine more and to also believe in that imagination enough to create to achieve that new space. Because also I come from a health perspective, so I'm a medic, and from a health perspective, it's also a very huge justice perspective, but also a solutions perspective. The Lancet's changed their language from climate change is the greatest global health threat to climate change is the greatest global health opportunity, because of the amount of health benefits and justice benefits that arise from the solutions if we take a climate justice lens. So I think there's so much motivation that can come from talking about solutions that are justice based, but also I guess that allows us to actually move into new spaces. And I think that that's why we need to talk about alternatives. There's been a lot of questions we didn't actually get to go to on economic systems and things like that. And that's something that I'm learning a lot about, because I recognize I'm not an economist, but I recognize that capitalism is incompatible with a climate just world. And I'm looking into solutions and what those could look like. And the co-host of my podcast is doing research into degrowth, and lots of other people I've been speaking to have been doing work around well-being and engage with it in a way that we're like, this could be real and this could be possible within our lifetimes, not in a way of, oh, maybe this is a nice thing, but we need to engage with these different solutions. And I would kind of encourage people to look into those themselves as well. But I'll leave it there so that Peter can get some words in.
Thank you so much to Peter, and maybe Vandana, if you can come in later at the end, if we are allowed to carry on, that would be great. But Peter, over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Well, really just to echo what several others have said, and sorry that my connection dropped out at a key moment. But I think, the way we talk about it in the Rapid Transition Alliance is around evidence-based hope, and it's really showing that this change is already happening, right? It's already happening in pockets of the world, across different sectors, across different regions. There's also rich historical examples. These are not new challenges in lots of ways. The sorts of forces we're pushing back against have been challenged over centuries, frankly. So let's sort of mine all that rich experience that we have. It's a bit like, as Vandana was saying, it's not really about recommending things. It's just about showing and doing and leading, that paths really are made by walking. So we just have to start doing these things. We definitely can't wait for governments or corporations to lead on this and show the way. And to come back to Michaela's point, I think it really is about the fundamentals of the economy, that we really need to rethink work and income and production and consumption in quite fundamental ways. But one of the first concrete things we can do ahead of the COP summit is really force the issue of what's called supply side, which is really how do we fairly leave remaining fossil fuels in the ground. It's absolutely the conversation most people don't want to have, but it's the conversation we have to have.
Thank you so much, Peter. And I know that you've been working with many different initiatives, including the Fossil Fuel Treaty. The idea that we essentially put a moratorium now on the extraction and exploration of ever new sources, and we deal with that supply side issue. As we said, we've only been dealing with the emission side. Maybe Vandana, over to you. I know that we will have to wrap up shortly, but I am so inspired by all of the work that you've done. You've done work as an intellectual, as a speaker, as an author, as an activist, as a mother to all sorts of different movements. So I would love you to leave us with some concluding remarks, and maybe this one idea and suggestion that Akafuna made, I would love to take forward, which is this intergenerational dialogue, which we're having here. People who've been involved for over 50 years, people who are at the start of their activist journey, and people like Pete and myself who are somewhere in the middle of that. And I would love to carry on this conversation, and I know that the audience would too. So maybe I'll leave you with the last word, and I will then have to brutally end this session.
Very, very quickly. So, the just like colonialism created white superiority, but it also caused an epistemic racism, that the knowledges that allow us to live within the circular economy and the regenerative economy of nature was just totally shut out. Yeah, the photosynthesis was shut out, the plants were shut out, ecological agriculture was shut out. And the climate problem is really fossil emissions polluting the atmosphere. But the solutions are, here is nature alive and well. The more we intensify biodiversity, the more we intensify biomass production, the more we pull the carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide out of the atmosphere, we grow more food, we grow more nutrition, we have more basic needs met, and we solve the climate problem. I'm not going to go into the data, but every serious research on this topic is showing in a decade, we could pull down the excess stocks by working with photosynthesis of plants and putting the soil oil back, the emissions from the oil back into the soil. Of course, putting zero emissions as the bottom line. I have a book called Soil Not Oil, which I wrote in the lead up to the Copenhagen summit. And a lot of the principles are there. 50%, as I said, comes from an industrial agriculture, which is also leading to the epidemics. It's also leading to hunger. So it's leading to nutritional apartheid. It is leading to a health apartheid. And all the problems start to get solved. We offer courses, you know, we have a beautiful university has grown from the plants and the soil at Navdanya. Go to the website of Navdanya, go to the website of Earth University. We are doing in October a long course where we work on the details of the solution. And for the young people who want to see that there is another path and we're just not looking at it, suddenly all kinds of possibilities get created, and they're the end of racism, they're the end of climate change, they're the end of hate, the end of fear, they're the end of hopelessness. And we are then creating the world that's livable for all. Love to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vandana. Thank you so much. And I think the lived experience, that understanding that Indigenous people, that local communities, those who lived with and in harmony with the land is really something that our scientists, the very best scientists, are discovering. Those interconnection and the importance of soil and the mycelium, you know, proves the interconnectedness of the world, which was always there in Indigenous knowledge. So I'm really happy also to see this, the science confirming the insights of these cultures, which were, as you say, diminished and marginalized, and in many cases the people are still being attacked and their rights not being upheld. So I hope let's hope COP26 can make a contribution to that. As I am a sort of nerdy lawyer, you know, I want to leave you with this two ideas, and if you're interested, please contact me. You know, the preamble of Paris is where often things are jettisoned when they can't be incorporated. They're either too big or too important and no one knows what to do with them. And there are two paragraphs, one on climate justice and Mother Earth and human rights, and one on just transition. And those are the two paragraphs, the preambular paragraphs that I feel we should operationalize. That's what Glasgow has to do. So I'm going to take my leave you with that thought, leave you with the idea that we'll carry on this intergenerational dialogue. I hope my colleagues, Anam, Farhan and others who've made this possible will help establish a follow-up process to that, and look forward to reading through the many questions. Actually, they're really, really useful and informative, and thanking you as the audience for joining us and staying over the hour. Thanks very much, and the recording will be out. Thank you, Michaela, Vandana, David, Peter, Akafuna, to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.